Hi there and welcome back to Japan, where I'm going to be giving my final thoughts now on our listen through to Made in Japan, the very first album by BAND-MAID. And obviously, just in case you haven't been following this, we've been listening to the special edition version, which includes the 2 bonus tracks, which I've been reliably told are 2 tracks that they did which predated this first album. So it's been quite an interesting tour, considering we've listened to so much BAND-MAID on this channel. We've got listen throughs to World Domination, the BAND-MAID EP, and pretty much every single I think they've ever done. We've reviewed the videos and the whole thing. So going back to stage 1, listening to an album which has none of the tracks that we've listened to so far. I mean, this predates all of the singles and videos and things that we know of. It's been a really interesting experience, and it's been great following it with you guys, the fans, who've given us so many wonderful comments and obviously steered us towards which songs you think are going to be best for the channel and which ones are going to like the most, and given us so many great comments. Now, just to quickly say before we move on, I know you've all heard this a million times before, but just in case you're just jumping into this video, in the description below, there's a link. Click on it and it'll give you a playlist with a track by track of all of the reviews we've done for this album. But basically, what are we going to say about Made in Japan? Well, Made in Japan, as reviews go, considering they're several CDs into their whole discography, they might be quite a young band, but they produce so much material and showed so much development and musicianship and songwriting ability in their more recent albums. This album, especially considering on top of that they didn't write it, it was staff written. There's not much pressure on this album. This is not one where you can go in going, oh, we're going to be really critical of BAND-MAID. It's one where, to be honest, whatever came out of this, you can kind of say, well, that's fair enough. So long, I mean, to be honest, I think the worst thing that this could have been is if you listen to it and gone, actually, that's really similar to World Domination. Because then the bad thing about that is you've been thinking, well, where's the band development? The fact this is totally different has been a real reward. Now, I've been really pleased. Like I say, I like their core sound, and they do have a core sound and a kind of a formula as a band. And when they stick to it, they're masters of the hard rock scene. They're brilliant at doing it. They keep identity in all of their songs whilst also keeping a sort of core philosophy. But I love when they go off in different directions and experiment, and when you just hear different parts of BAND-MAID, because they're such good musicians and songwriters, as we know now. But at the core, they're such good musicians that you know they can do many, many different things, and it's nice when you see that shown. As I've said before, songs like Start Over, Screaming actually on the other side of that, the BAND-MAID EP, there's lots of little examples of when they do experimentations and push themselves a little bit beyond, and often it's really rewarding because you know they can do what they can do, so hearing them do something else and nailing that as well just further adds to the wonderful body of work they have, gives you more to listen to, and gives you more respect for them as an artist. Now, obviously, like I say, no expectations when you go into this album, because it would have been their first album. No one would have known anything other than them. So when we listened to this, I was pointing out that of the 8 tracks that officially are the album, not including the bonus tracks quite yet, when we look at those 8 tracks, I would say they were split into 4 of them are straight up pop rock. Yeah, they're pop rock. This one, Be Okay, Evergreen, Knocking on Your Heart, and Big Dad, they're straight up pop rock in my opinion. The tracks Key and By My Tears appear to have much more of an indicative sound of what they're going for more recently. They're the harder tracks, and for the best part they work quite well. And then the last 2 tracks are kind of a nice sort of mix. They fit into somewhere a little bit more anthemic and, if you like, round off the sound as a total. So this album actually has quite a bit of variation on it, but for the best part I would say it's aiming in a poppier direction. And when it does that, I like it. Now, these songs, I've said that I was trying to work out, because the songs are much more simply played than they are on them modern albums. As I've said, one of the things that I really like about BAND-MAID is the fact that they do these intricate, complicated songs, but they always carefully walk that very difficult fine line between being too showy and doing too much and basically being, hey, look at us, we're great musicians, and being too simple and you going, well, this is a good song, but it comes a bit forgettable because there's not enough detail in it. They walk that fine line brilliantly and find a nice in-between spot where there's so much musical detail, but it's often done very modestly. Now, this being an earlier album is much more simple. It's more on that side of the line where you go, okay, there's not much intricacy to this, but what there is, it works really well. The songs are great, and the musicianship is good, even if it's quite understated for the best part. Misa was the one musician in this band who really stood out on this album. I mean, she was really, really showing off. I mean, obviously, Psyche's voice is always going to be Psyche's voice, so she sounds great on all of it, so it's kind of hard to really draw any line on that. But the other girls were kind of kind of playing in a relatively restrained manner. And I did ask the question, I wonder if that's because these are staff-written songs and they're just starting out on their career, so they can't really fight against it much and say, I want to do more, or whether it was just younger, and so they were earlier in their music career and maybe less capable of doing the sort of showy things that they can do now, or what the reason was behind that. But as a general, much of a muchness, it was an early point in their career. You can't really complain about it, but it is noticeable this is far more of a simple album, and it doesn't have the intricacies that make a lot of their musical work from more recently stand out as being really identifiably great. This, therefore, as a musical band, was a little bit more generic on its quality level. That said, like I say, Misa did stand out for just nailing it all the way through, but in Japan it's kind of normal that bass players in almost every style of music, especially in more poppy music, are really given free rein to go crazy. Just something about the way that Japanese music is, bass players always kind of can go mad. And so I'm not surprised, maybe it was just that Misa was the one person who had the reins pulled off the most. But credit to her, she stood out as being the standout top musician in the band on this particular album. And Akane, who usually I think Akane is fantastic, the way she fills in accents, the little bits and songs that you'd never think of, but does it so appropriately. She, like I say, was just kind of holding a groove for the best bit, a few fills here and there, but nothing really that suggested, as I would say now, one of the greatest drummers of all time, in my opinion. And certainly in my sort of top 3 drummers living today. So, yeah. On those points, you could probably say, okay, maybe this is a little bit underwhelming. And also, as the first album, it's hard to sort of compare it to the modern stuff. Because, if you were listening to it as the first-time album, you wouldn't think of it like that. You just think, well, this is a really good rock album, because what they do now is more exceptional than this is, non-exceptional. What this is just kind of normal by the standards of most of their peers, in all fairness. So when you listen to it from that perspective, yeah, it's kind of actually perfectly fine, the musicianship, just not, like I say, exceptional in the way their modern stuff is. So when you move on to the songs themselves, that's where I get a little bit of a joy in saying, well, this kind of feels like, if we were comparing it to the modern stuff, if it was coming out now, you'd say, well, this is BAND-MAID the pop EP, because it's much more poppy. Even when it gets heavy, the production kind of gets heavier as well, to sort of stop it just turning into full-on hard rock metal-y stuff. It has a lot of the indications, a lot of the sounds and melodies that you can kind of see as familiar of what BAND-MAID are now. You can see the little sparks of it, but as a general, at some points, it could be a totally different band. Like I said, I've drawn a Silent Siren comparison because some of the songs actually do sound like they could be Silent Siren songs. They have that sort of I think actually this is the big difference between the two bands. Like, BAND-MAID almost all the time are quite intense. Even when they're soft, they're kind of intense. There's always a sort of an intensity to their sound, whereas Silent Siren, even when they're at their most musical and playful, they never feel intense. They always feel like there's a sense of, this is harmless music. This is not, we're not coming to get you. So the interesting thing about this album is it crosses the border that a lot of these tracks, most of these tracks, like I said, the more poppy ones, they don't have any feeling of intensity to them. They just feel like the band want to have fun with you, which is quite interesting, actually. Quite interesting, because that's something you don't really think about much with BAND-MAID. You don't think about the intensity that they carry in most of their songs, but when you see them doing something or hear them doing something quite different, you then suddenly realise, yeah, actually, it's quite interesting to hear the intensity toned down and just a sort of general feeling of joy resonating through more of the album. Like I say, no disrespect to either their old or new stuff, it's just an interesting contrast. So this album for me, yeah, replay value, it probably doesn't have the replay value their modern stuff does, because it doesn't have quite as much intricacy to it. As an album, it has more variation than, like, World Domination is, for the best part, is just a full-on album all the time. There isn't that much variation in the tone of it, even if there is in the songwriting. This has more of a tonal variation, which means that maybe as a sort of a background album for a nice day, it makes more of an interesting variant, more of an interesting listen. But like I say, it's interesting that as an album it has a lot of variation, where the songs tend to have less intricacy overall. It's only 8 tracks, so it doesn't have enough time to wear thin, but I don't think it would. I think they have a sort of a good identity to each of the songs. There were some songs that I didn't think were as good. I did point out, interestingly, although I know this is a song they still play acoustically, Knocking on Your Heart I found quite disappointing. It sounded like the song was really undeveloped. especially when it came before Big Dad, which was one of the album songs that I liked most on this one. To me, it felt really like there was a lot of writing in there. Although, again, it was sort of low on intricacies, the writing was very detailed, and it had this really sort of nicely thought out chord pattern and melody, whereas Knocking on Your Heart seemed to lack all of those things. It seemed to be relatively, by their standards, relatively bland on both of those fronts. Not a bad song, but immediately forgettable. Be OK, the first track on the album, and Evergreen, I really enjoyed those as well. I think I still had to get over, the first time I heard them, I still had to get over the surprise, because it was just when I was hit by, oh my god, I'm being confronted by this poppy version of BAND-MAID, pop rock version of BAND-MAID. But now I've listened to them a couple more times, I can kind of confirm actually they're just good pop rock songs, very enjoyable. Key, I thought, was the best example of hard rock on this album. Okay, it wasn't the heaviest song ever, certainly by their standards, but it did rock out really well, and I felt that it did have a real bite to it and a real sort of musical maturity to it. What they could sort of get through, the guitar solo, it was the first guitar solo on the album, was on track 3. Can you imagine them doing that now? It really sort of felt like you could feel the rock monsters that they were going to turn into resonating a lot through that song. By My Tears, like I say, it was a good one, but it just didn't quite click as well as Key. It was the other of the two harder rock songs, in my opinion, on this album. It just never felt like it clicked quite as well. It felt a little bit like it was jolting between different things and not flowing so smoothly, but the individual bits were great, just the sum total didn't feel quite as well gelled. But still, that was a really good song. As I say, Knocking on Your Heart, I found that quite disappointing, and Big Dad, I found that a really good turnaround. Track number 7, the one that has some kanji in it that I can't read, so sorry, I can't actually tell you effectively what the name of that song was. Like I say, that's when we started to get this rounded conclusion to the album. The last 2 tracks really giving a very rounded sound, and that was a nice one. I think there was a good memorable hook, a good sort of fleshed out sound. Again, like I keep on saying, none of those intricacies we expect from modern BAND-MAID, but a quality of writing that made you not so much worry about that as just kind of enjoy the overall tone of the song, and it had a great build up to it as well. And then Forward was a great way to round things up. Now, with the 2 bonus tracks, Love Something blah 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 Matador, like I say, that I felt that was kind of it was a rather generic BAND-MAID melody, but the Latin touches were really nice, and Summer Drive just straight sounded like we have recorded a Silent Siren song. That was the most unidentifiably BAND-MAID song that I think appears anywhere on this album, but that, like I say, that was one of the 2 bonus tracks that apparently predate the album itself. So when I'm thinking about this album, there's so many things to take in. The perspective of how you listen to it now, how you'd have listened to it when it first came out, whether you regard it as being a dull album for having less musicianship, or whether you regard it as being an interesting album for subverting the style that we now know them to have for the best part, their core sound. I can't listen to it as a person listening to it for the first time, but if I was listening to it when it came out for the first time, I would have definitely been wanting to buy more. And I would have really enjoyed the fact that it had those changes in tone and mood. I think this is an album that I would have definitely loved, and I would have fallen in love with the band from hearing this album when it came out. Hearing it now as someone who joined into the party very late, only really January, February this year, hearing it now from that perspective and going back to this album, I have to say that I still think it makes a great contrast. Would I listen to it over modern BAND-MAID albums? Depends on the mood. I'm thinking specifically of comparing this to their most recent full release, World Domination. World Domination is definitely a more emotionally engaging, intense and detailed album that if you want to sit down, you really want to get into an album, that would be more rewarding, I think, but also it would be more wearing because it has less variation. It's longer and it sticks to a certain tone and it gets more tiring. This, whereas World Domination, when you get to the end, I think you kind of feel like, great experience is over. This album, when I get to the end of it, my initial feeling is, okay, I want to play that again. Now, is that to say it's better? No, it's not to say it's better. What it means, though, is that this album, first of all, it's more compact. It doesn't really push the limits of how long it can stay. It doesn't push its staying power. It just sort of sticks to a very concise length. And on top of that is the fact that, like I say, it has so many variations in mood that you're kind of thinking when you get to the end, it's like, actually, now I feel like I want to hear a track like this, so I'm going to go back around to get to that track again. Whereas World Domination, when you get to the end, it's either like, I want to hear more hard rock, or else let's not put this back on. If you do want to hear more hard rock, then you go around again. So I think that both albums have very different qualities, very different sort of selling points, and that at the end of the day is a fantastic thing to be able to say after listening to 2 albums. I know they're at different ends of their scale, but they're not actually that. If you consider how many years between this coming out and World Domination, it's not that far apart chronologically. But it is really great that you can come out of this saying that you get 2 very different things from the albums. And, for anyone who thinks that they've totally lost their pop touch, yes, I would perhaps like to hear them play around and do some songs that are a bit more poppy as well to contrast their rocky side of things. But don't forget, if you look at Rockin' Me on World Domination, that song really, now I hear it back, it channels this first album quite a lot, but it's a song that the girls have written themselves, so it's like them channeling what they learned from this first album and delivering it. So I don't think the spirit of this album is dead if you are one of the people who maybe felt that they've become too hard now. I think that they've managed to keep a lot of the things that they learnt from this, even if they don't use these sounds as much in their modern music. So anyway, I really enjoyed this album, like I say, and I think it is a very big contrast from the other things I've heard from them, so it's almost impossible to compare it as a BAND-MAID album, but isn't it an interesting demonstration of their overall body of work? So thank you so much for tuning into this. Like I say, in the description you can find a link which will take you to a play-by-play of all the tracks and the reactions for this album, as well as you can go and check out, we've got a whole playlist for all the BAND-MAID reviews we've done, which must be now like 90 million, 1,000, whatever, and all the other reviews we've done of other bands. So by all means, feel free to get involved, like, subscribe, comment on this. We'd love to get the comments. It's always interesting to see what other people think, because music's all opinions after all. As educated as I try to make mine, it's all opinions. So just again, like I say, thank you for tuning in. Have a lovely evening until we see you again, which will hopefully be very soon. For now, from Japan, ciao ciao.